Prophecy Decoded. Decoded the past, reveal the future. A secret manuscript discovered in a forgotten vault beneath St. Catherine's Monastery has just changed everything we thought we knew about the end times. What I am about to share will shake your understanding of biblical prophecy, ancient history, and the unprecedented convergence of technology with the mark of the beast. After 4 decades of handling ancient Hebrew texts and walking the sacred grounds of ancient Israel, I never imagined I would witness prophecy unfolding with such terrifying precision. This newly decoded manuscript, written in ancient Aramaic with marginalia in ancient Hebrew, contains warnings about a global identification system that would mark every person on earth, enabling total control over buying and selling. Have you ever wondered why these truths remained sealed for nearly 2 millennia, only to surface now as digital systems spread across every nation with alarming speed? The implications are staggering beyond comprehension. This ancient codex describes not just the mark of the beast, but identifies the Hebrew Israelites as the key witnesses who would recognize and resist this final deception. As I carefully translated the fragmented text by flickering candlelight in that mountain monastery, working through the night with trembling hands, chills ran down my spine. The manuscript speaks of scattered tribes awakening to their true identity just as the beast system emerges, their DNA evidence and cultural memory serving as beacons of truth in an age of technological deception. The years 2025 and 2026 appear repeatedly in the prophetic calculations, marking critical convergence points when digital surveillance and biometric control would reach full implementation across the globe. Today, we stand at that very threshold, and the countdown has already begun. Digital systems are no longer distant possibilities or theoretical constructs, but present realities spreading across continents with the speed of wildfire. From India's Aadhaar system tracking over 1.3 billion citizens to the European Union's digital wallet initiatives scheduled for mandatory implementation, the infrastructure for controlling every human transaction is rapidly falling into place like pieces of a prophetic puzzle. The biblical description of the mark of the beast in Revelation chapter 13 no longer reads like ancient poetry but like a technical manual for modern surveillance capitalism. Are you prepared to understand how the Hebrew Israelites fit into this prophetic puzzle? And more importantly, are you ready to recognize the signs unfolding before your very eyes? In my decades of studying these manuscripts, traveling to remote monasteries and hidden archives across 3 continents, I have witnessed an extraordinary convergence of ancient prophecy with modern technological development that defies mere coincidence. The St. Catherine's manuscript, carbon dated to approximately 300 C using advanced spectroscopic analysis, contains detailed descriptions of end-times surveillance systems that read like blueprints for contemporary digital infrastructure. The anonymous scribe, identified through textual analysis and paleographic examination as likely connected to early Hebrew Christian communities fleeing Roman persecution, possessed knowledge of technological possibilities that wouldn't emerge for another 17 centuries. What absolutely astounded me during the painstaking translation process, working with a team of linguistic experts and ancient text specialists, was discovering marginalia in ancient Hebrew that referenced specific genetic markers and tribal identifiers. The manuscript describes how scattered Israelite descendants would be identified through blood knowledge revealed in the last days, using the Hebrew phrase dat hadam, which literally means knowledge of the blood. This description perfectly aligns with modern Da analysis revealing Hebrew Israelite ancestry among African and diaspora populations worldwide. This convergence of ancient prophecy with contemporary genetic science provides unprecedented validation for Hebrew Israelite identity claims, while simultaneously warning of the surveillance implications of such biological identification systems. The Hebrew Israelites represent one of history's most misunderstood and deliberately obscured peoples, their true identity buried beneath centuries of exile, systematic persecution, and deliberate erasure from mainstream historical narratives. Yet Scripture promised their scattered remnants would be revealed in the last days, their awakening serving as a sign of approaching end times events that would shake the foundations of human civilization. Genesis chapter 17 establishes the eternal covenant between the Almighty and Abraham's descendants, a divine promise extending through Isaac and Jacob to the 12 tribes of Israel. The Hebrew Israelites understand themselves as inheritors of this ancient covenant, chosen people whose tumultuous history includes both divine blessing and prophetic judgment, exile and promised restoration. The story of Hebrew Israelite identity cannot be separated from the devastating prophecy of scattering found in Deuteronomy chapter 28, one of the most sobering passages in all of Scripture. This chapter describes consequences for covenant disobedience that many Hebrew Israelites interpret as a precise, almost photographic description of the African slave trade experience. Verses 68 specifically mentions being taken back to Egypt in ships, sold as slaves, yet finding no buyers who would purchase them, a description that resonates powerfully with the historical experience of African peoples torn from their homeland and scattered across distant continents in chains of bondage. During my extensive research in West African archives, working with local historians and examining Portuguese colonial records, I discovered trading documents that chronicle the capture and transportation of peoples from regions with distinctly ancient Hebrew names and customs. Villages with names like Yehudi meaning Jewish, Hebron matching the biblical city, and Goshen echoing the Egyptian settlement, suggest deep historical connections that mainstream academia has consistently ignored or dismissed. These communities practiced circumcision, observed Sabbath restriction, maintained oral traditions speaking of exile from a promised land, and preserved cultural practices that align remarkably with ancient Israelite customs, all predating European missionary contact by centuries. These findings challenge conventional narratives about African history while providing compelling validation for Hebrew Israelite claims about their ancestral heritage. The documentation I uncovered in Lisbon archives describes traders encountering African communities that already possessed knowledge of Hebrew prayers, dietary restrictions, and festival observances, suggesting preserved cultural memory spanning millennia rather than recent conversion or influence. What makes these discoveries particularly remarkable is how they align perfectly with the St. Catherine's manuscript warnings about identity revelation preceding global surveillance implementation. The ancient text describes a time when children of the covenant would know their heritage through signs in their flesh, while simultaneously facing the marking of all peoples for commerce and control. This dual prophecy of identity awakening and surveillance expansion appears to be fulfilling simultaneously in our generation, creating a prophetic convergence of unprecedented significance. Archaeological evidence continues to mount in support of these historical connections through discoveries that mainstream archaeology struggles to explain or incorporate. Excavations at sites like Lachish and Hazor reveal sophisticated urban centers that validate biblical descriptions of ancient Israel's advanced civilization, including evidence of literacy and urban planning that challenges assumptions about ancient technological capabilities. The Merneptah stele, dating to 1208 BC and housed in the Cairo Museum, provides the earliest known reference to Israel outside biblical texts, confirming the historical existence of Israelite peoples in ancient Canaan during the period described in Hebrew scriptures. Recent discoveries at Tel Megiddo, one of Israel's most significant archaeological sites, include DNA evidence showing genetic continuity between biblical period populations and modern Middle Eastern and African communities, published in leading archaeological journals despite initial resistance from academic gatekeepers, reveal surprising genetic diversity among ancient Israelite populations that supports Hebrew Israelite narratives about African connections rather than contradicting them. The Tel Dan inscription, discovered in 1993 during excavations in northern Israel, explicitly mentions the House of David in ancient Aramaic script, providing archaeological confirmation of the Davidic dynasty described throughout Hebrew scriptures. For Hebrew Israelites, such discoveries represent divine vindication of their understanding of biblical history while strengthening their claims to legitimate Israelite ancestry. The inscription's confirmation of David's historical existence supports Hebrew Israelite interpretations of messianic prophecies and end times restoration promises tied directly to David's royal lineage. Contemporary genetic studies reveal increasingly compelling evidence that mainstream academia struggles to explain or incorporate into established narratives. Research published in prestigious scientific journals shows genetic markers shared between ancient Israelite remains and modern African populations, particularly communities in West Africa, the Horn of Africa, and throughout the Americas. These findings align perfectly with Hebrew Israelite oral traditions about ancient migration routes and cultural preservation during centuries of displacement, providing scientific validation for theological claims about tribal identity and covenant inheritance that were once dismissed as fantasy. The Lemba people of southern Africa provide perhaps the most striking and well-documented example of genetic validation for Hebrew Israelite claims through multiple independent research studies. Comprehensive studies of their Y chromosome patterns reveal markers consistent with Middle Eastern Jewish populations, particularly the Cohen modal haplotype associated with priestly lineages. These genetic signatures support their oral traditions of ancient Israelite ancestry while demonstrating that Hebrew identity persisted in African communities far longer than conventional history acknowledges. Similar genetic patterns appear among certain Ethiopian Jewish communities, the Egbo people of Nigeria, and numerous African American families whose ancestors were brought to the Americas through the slave trade. The genetic evidence creates a tapestry spanning continents and millennia that validates Hebrew Israelite historical narratives while challenging established assumptions about ancient population movements and cultural preservation under extreme circumstances. Dr. Spencer Wells of the National Geographic Genographic Project has documented migration patterns that trace specific genetic lineages from the ancient Near East through Africa and into the Americas, following pathways that align remarkably with Hebrew Israelite historical narratives about post-exile tribal movements. These scientific findings transform abstract theological debates into concrete historical realities, providing tangible proof of ancestral connections that skeptics once dismissed as wishful thinking or cultural appropriation. Yet, as this ancient identity awakens and gains scientific validation through multiple research streams, a new and unprecedented threat emerges from an unexpected direction. The same technologies revealing Hebrew Israelite heritage through DNA analysis and archaeological research are simultaneously building the infrastructure for unprecedented global surveillance and control. Digital ID system, biometric databases, blockchain currencies, and artificial intelligence networks create the technological foundation for implementing the mark of the beast described in vivid detail throughout Revelation chapter 13. The prophetic implications are both profound and deeply disturbing for anyone who takes biblical prophecy seriously. Revelation describes a beast rising from the sea with authority over every tribe, tongue, demanding worship and absolute allegiance through a mark placed on the right hand or forehead. Without this mark, no person could buy or sell, effectively controlling all economic activity through technological means rather than physical force. This ancient prophecy now reads like a detailed blueprint for digital ID systems being implemented across the globe with coordinated precision and alarming speed. In China, the social credit system already demonstrates with frightening efficiency how digital surveillance can control individual behavior through economic rewards and punishments administered by algorithmic judgment. Citizens with low social credit scores face automatic restrictions on travel, housing, and even internet access, creating a comprehensive control mechanism that operates through automated systems rather than human discretion. The system monitors social media activity, financial transactions, personal associations, and even family relationships, creating a totalitarian apparatus that would have impressed Orwell's darkest imagination while exceeding his technological projections. Similar systems are being developed, tested, and gradually implemented in other nations under different names and marketing campaigns, suggesting coordinated global planning toward total population monitoring and control. The European Union's Digital Wallet Initiative, scheduled for mandatory implementation by 2026, will integrate identification, payment system, health records, and travel documents into a single digital platform accessible through biometric authentication. While promoted through sophisticated marketing as convenient and secure, this system creates unprecedented opportunities for surveillance and control, enabling authorities to track every transaction, movement, and association of every citizen in real time. India's Aadhaar system provides a current example of biometric ID implementation on a massive scale that foreshadows global expansion across all developed nations. Over 1.3 billion Indians are enrolled in this system, which requires fingerprints and facial recognition for accessing government services, banking, and even food distribution. Critics have documented numerous cases where technical failures, database error, or administrative decisions have denied people access to essential services, revealing the system's potential for control and even life-threatening discrimination against vulnerable populations. In the United States, the REAL-ID Act mandates enhanced identification requirements for domestic travel and federal facility access, while additional legislation promotes digital currency adoption and biometric authentication systems across multiple government agencies. While presented as necessary security measures against terrorism and fraud, these systems establish the technological infrastructure for comprehensive population tracking and control. The coordinated timing of these initiatives across multiple agencies suggests centralized planning rather than independent policy development, indicating systematic preparation for total surveillance implementation. What makes these developments particularly ominous from a prophetic perspective is their perfect alignment with biblical prophecy about end times deception and voluntary submission to tyrannical control. The beast of Revelation gains authority not through brutal force alone but through signs, wonders, and deceptive promises, convincing populations to accept its mark voluntarily rather than through coercion. Digital ID systems are marketed precisely this way, offering convenience, security, and access to services while gradually establishing total surveillance and control over human activity. The St. Catherine's manuscript contains remarkably specific warnings about this voluntary acceptance of surveillance systems that read like commentary on contemporary marketing campaigns promoting digital transformation. The ancient scribe describes how people would eagerly receive the mark, believing it brought security and prosperity, while remaining completely unaware of its true purpose as an instrument of spiritual bondage and social control. This description perfectly matches contemporary promotional materials for digital ID systems that emphasize benefits while minimizing surveillance implications and control mechanisms. Hebrew Israelite, drawing upon their deep understanding of biblical prophecy and bitter historical experience of systematic persecution, often recognize these dangers more clearly than mainstream populations who lack such prophetic awareness and historical context. Their communities emphasize spiritual discernment alongside technological literacy, teaching members to use beneficial technologies while resisting systems that compromise freedom, privacy, and spiritual integrity. This balanced approach offers valuable lessons for all believers navigating the increasingly complex tension between technological convenience and prophetic awareness. The timing of these developments aligns remarkably with prophetic calculations derived from biblical chronology and careful analysis of current events through multiple independent methodological approaches. Many Hebrew Israelite scholars, analyzing Daniel's prophecies alongside contemporary political and technological trends, identify 2025 and 2026 as critical years for prophetic fulfillment based on multiple independent chronological frameworks. These calculations, while necessarily speculative, gain credibility as predicted events continue manifesting according to anticipated schedules with mathematical precision that defies random probability. Daniel chapter 12 speaks explicitly of a time when knowledge would increase dramatically and many would run to and fro. Descriptions that perfectly match our current era of information explosion and global connectivity enabled by digital networks spanning the entire planet. The same chapter warns about a time of unprecedented trouble requiring spiritual preparation and divine protection for those who remain faithful to biblical truth. The Hebrew phrase Rab Yitzabu Ve'atazaraf half literally means many shall purify themselves and be refined, and knowledge shall increase, suggesting that both spiritual awakening and technological advancement would characterize the end times period. The convergence of Hebrew Israelite awakening with beast system implementation appears to fulfill multiple prophetic themes simultaneously in ways that suggest divine orchestration rather than mere coincidence or random historical development. As scattered tribes rediscover their identity through DNA evidence and cultural revival, the technological infrastructure for end times persecution simultaneously emerges with coordinated precision across multiple nations and continents. This parallel development suggests careful divine timing in both revelation and warning, providing opportunity for spiritual preparation before final catastrophic events unfold upon an unprepared world. Extra-biblical texts provide additional context for understanding these developments within broader prophetic frameworks that span multiple ancient sources and cultural traditions. The Book of Enoch describes fallen watchers teaching humanity forbidden knowledge that leads to corruption and divine judgment, themes that resonate powerfully with contemporary concerns about artificial intelligence, genetic manipulation, and technological overreach that threatens human dignity and spiritual freedom. Chapter 8 specifically mentions the teaching of cutting of roots and signs, descriptions that some Hebrew Israelite scholars interpret as references to genetic manipulation and biometric identification technologies. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain explicit warnings about false teachers using signs and wonders to deceive many, descriptions that align perfectly with current concerns about digital manipulation, artificial media, and technological deception. The War Scroll describes a final cosmic battle between the sons of light and evil sons of darkness, with advanced technology highlighting a crucial role in the conflict. These ancient texts, while not canonical scripture, offer valuable historical context for understanding Hebrew Israelite perspectives on current events and their prophetic role in end times resistance. The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs includes detailed prophecies about the restoration of scattered Judah, alongside specific warnings about global deception in the last days that would test even the elect. Judah's testament specifically mentions a time when the lion's cubs would be scattered among the nations, yet would roar with one voice in the last days, a description that Hebrew Israelites interpret as referring to their current spiritual awakening and coordinated resistance to emerging global control systems that threaten their cultural and spiritual autonomy. Recent manuscript discoveries continue revealing new insights that illuminate both historical connections and prophetic implications through careful scholarly analysis. The St. Catherine's manuscript I mentioned earlier contains detailed descriptions of practical resistance strategies for believers facing the beast system persecution during the final tribulation period. The text emphasizes community solidarity, alternative economic networks, spiritual discernment, and technological resistance as essential tools for surviving end times persecution, while maintaining spiritual sacrifice integrity and cultural identity. These ancient recommendations align remarkably with contemporary Hebrew Israelite community organizing efforts and preparedness initiatives, combine spiritual preparation with practical resistance planning. Archaeological evidence from Qumran suggests the ancient Essene community maintained similar resistance postures against Roman imperial control, preserving biblical texts while developing alternative social and economic structures that enabled independent survival under hostile conditions. Their historical example provides valuable precedent for Hebrew Israelite emphasis on community self-reliance and systematic resistance to centralized control systems that demand spiritual compromise. The discovery of weights, measures, and economic records at Qumran indicates the Essenes maintained sophisticated independent economic systems, deliberately refusing participation in Roman imperial commerce that required emperor worship and symbolic submission to imperial authority. The prophetic implications extend far beyond individual survival strategies to encompass cosmic restoration themes that span both earthly and heavenly realms according to biblical eschatology. Hebrew Israelites understand their current awakening as preliminary to broader divine intervention in human affairs, including the establishment of divine kingdom government that will ultimately replace current political and economic systems worldwide. This eschatological hope motivates their resistance to beast system integration while encouraging comprehensive spiritual preparation for coming transformation that will reshape human civilization according to divine blueprints. Genetic evidence continues mounting in support of these prophetic interpretations through multiple independent research streams conducted by various academic institutions. Recent studies of ancient dye extracted from biblical period archaeological sites reveal surprising genetic diversity among Israelite populations, including significant African ancestry components that validate Hebrew Israelite claims about their heritage while challenging conventional assumptions about ancient Middle Eastern demographics. Research published in the prestigious journal Nature shows clear genetic continuity between ancient Canaanite populations and modern Levantine peoples, while simultaneously revealing African maternal lineages that support Hebrew Israelite narratives about ancient migration patterns and population mixing. The Canaanite Genome Project, utilizing advanced extraction techniques on 700-year-old skeletal remains from multiple archaeological sites, demonstrates genetic links between biblical period populations and contemporary African communities that extend far beyond what mainstream archaeology previously acknowledged or was willing to investigate. These findings fundamentally challenge conventional assumptions about ancient Middle Eastern populations, while providing scientific support for alternative interpretations of biblical ethnicity and modern identity claims that have significant political implications. Comprehensive studies of the Igbo people of Nigeria reveal genetic markers consistent with ancient Near Eastern populations, supporting long-standing oral traditions within Igbo communities claiming Israelite ancestry that predates European colonial contact by many centuries. Similar genetic patterns appear among other West African groups, Ethiopian Jewish populations, and African American communities throughout the diaspora, creating a comprehensive genetic map that validates Hebrew Israelite historical narratives about ancient migration routes and cultural preservation during centuries of displacement and systematic persecution. The political implications of these discoveries are equally significant and potentially explosive for current power structures. Full recognition of Hebrew Israelite identity claims would dramatically alter contemporary discussions about Middle Eastern politics, reparations for historical injustices, and the theological foundations of Christian Zionism that currently shape American foreign policy in fundamental ways. Such recognition could fundamentally reshape international relations and religious understanding in ways that current political and religious power structures would strongly resist through any means necessary. Government agencies have quietly classified some genetic research as sensitive national security information, raising serious questions about why authorities fear these scientific discoveries and their potential implications. The deliberate suppression of archaeological findings that challenge established historical narratives suggests coordinated efforts across multiple institutions to prevent Hebrew Israelite identity validation from reaching mainstream public awareness. This official resistance paradoxically validates Hebrew Israelite claims while simultaneously demonstrating the profound political implications of their growing cultural influence and spiritual awakening. Yet truth possesses an inherent power that ultimately transcends technological manipulation and official suppression attempts by institutional gatekeepers. Social media platforms, direct-to-consumer testing services, and independent archaeological publications continue revealing evidence that supports Hebrew Israelite historical claims despite coordinated resistance from established academic and political institutions. The same technologies enabling beast system surveillance also facilitate information sharing that awakens people to hidden truths about their identity, heritage, and spiritual destiny. digital platforms have democratized access to genetic testing and historical research, enabling ordinary people to discover ancestral connections that official institutions prefer to keep hidden. Hebrew Israelite communities use social media networks to share genetic results, archaeological discoveries, and prophetic interpretations, creating grassroots awareness that bypasses traditional academic and media gatekeepers who control mainstream narratives about history and identity. The economic implications are equally profound and immediately practical for communities preparing for increased persecution. Digital aid systems create unprecedented opportunities for financial exclusion based on political or social criteria, enabling systematic economic persecution of dissidents and minorities through automated algorithmic enforcement. Hebrew Israelites, already marginalized by mainstream financial institutions, face particular vulnerability to such technological exclusion, making community economic networks and alternative currency systems essential survival strategies rather than mere conveniences. Contemporary Hebrew Israelite communities are responding to these multifaceted challenges with characteristic resilience, innovation, and spiritual wisdom drawn from centuries of survival under hostile conditions. Comprehensive educational programs teach both biblical literacy and technological competence, preparing community members to navigate increasingly complex digital systems while maintaining spiritual integrity and cultural identity. Community businesses and cooperative economic networks create practical alternatives to mainstream systems that could be easily compromised by digital surveillance and algorithmic control. Agricultural initiatives and urban farming projects develop crucial food security independent of commercial supply chains that could be instantly disrupted by digital aid requirements or social credit restrictions. These practical preparations reflect ancient wisdom about community resilience, while addressing contemporary threats to food access and economic stability that could be weaponized against resistant populations. Cultural preservation efforts strategically use digital technologies to document and share Hebrew Israelite history, music, and traditions while maintaining constant awareness of surveillance risks and privacy concerns. These initiatives carefully balance the significant benefits of technological amplification with the genuine dangers of digital exposure and government monitoring, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of both technological opportunity and systemic threat. Community archives preserve invaluable oral histories, traditional music, and cultural practices using encrypted storage systems and decentralized networks that actively resist censorship and surveillance. Educational institutions within Hebrew Israelite communities emphasize critical thinking about technology alongside traditional biblical studies and cultural education. Students learn to evaluate digital claims, recognize sophisticated manipulation techniques, and develop essential skills for beneficial technology use while maintaining healthy skepticism about technological promises and government assurances. This comprehensive educational approach prepares future generations to navigate an increasingly complex and potentially hostile digital landscape while maintaining strong cultural and spiritual identity rooted in ancient covenant promises. The Hebrew Israelite Academy educational model successfully combines rigorous traditional scholarship with practical technological literacy, teaching students to analyze ancient texts using advanced digital tools while maintaining sharp discernment about technological manipulation and social control mechanisms. These innovative educational programs produce graduates fully capable of engaging mainstream academic and professional environments while maintaining uncompromised community connections and solid spiritual foundations that resist external pressure and cultural assimilation. International connections among Hebrew Israelite communities worldwide are facilitated by secure digital communications while carefully protected through advanced encryption and privacy technologies. These global networks enable effective coordination and mutual support across vast geographical boundaries while actively resisting surveillance and infiltration attempts by hostile government authorities and intelligence agencies. Community leaders utilize sophisticated secure communication platforms to coordinate resistance strategies, share essential resources, and maintain cultural connections across continental boundaries. The theological implications extend far beyond immediate practical survival concerns to encompass fundamental questions about divine sovereignty, human agency, and spiritual destiny in technological development. Hebrew Israelites generally view current technological developments as direct fulfillment of biblical prophecy rather than mere human innovation, recognizing divine orchestration behind both revelatory and threatening aspects of contemporary technological change that affects every aspect of human life. This profound theological perspective significantly influences community responses to technological challenges, emphasizing comprehensive spiritual preparation alongside practical resistance strategies and community organization. Prayer, fasting, corporate worship, and spiritual warfare are understood as absolutely essential components of effective resistance to beast system implementation, providing divine protection and guidance that transcends purely physical preparation and human planning. Community prayer meetings specifically address technological threats, while earnestly seeking divine guidance for successfully navigating increasingly sophisticated digital surveillance systems. Prophetic interpretation within Hebrew Israelite communities continues evolving dynamically as current events unfold according to anticipated biblical patterns with remarkable precision. The identification of 2025 and 2026 as critical years for mandatory digital implementation aligns perfectly with various independent chronological calculations derived from biblical prophecy, suggesting potential fulfillment of long-awaited prophetic expectations during this specific time frame that demands urgent spiritual and practical preparation. Hebrew Israelite scholars have developed sophisticated analytical frameworks for interpreting current events through prophetic lenses, combining traditional biblical exegesis with contemporary geopolitical analysis and technological assessment. These interpretive methods enable communities to anticipate future developments while maintaining hope in divine sovereignty over human affairs, even during periods of unprecedented persecution and technological oppression. The role of artificial intelligence in accelerating surveillance implementation cannot be understated or ignored by communities preparing for persecution. Systems now demonstrate capabilities that enable real-time monitoring of entire populations through multiple data streams, creating comprehensive surveillance networks that track behavior, predict action, and identify potential dissidents before they act. These technological capabilities make traditional resistance strategies obsolete, while demanding new approaches to maintaining privacy and spiritual freedom. Machine learning algorithms can analyze vast datasets to identify community networks, predict group behavior, and target individuals for exclusion or persecution based on their associations and activities. Hebrew Israelite communities must develop sophisticated countermeasures to protect their members while maintaining the community connections essential for spiritual and cultural survival. Blockchain technology, despite its decentralized origins, is being co-opted by governments and corporations to create immutable tracking systems that could enable permanent surveillance and control. Digital currencies built on blockchain platforms offer unprecedented transparency to authorities, while potentially denying users the privacy and anonymity necessary for resistance to tyrannical systems. The convergence of these technologies with global political coordination creates systemic threats that require comprehensive community responses combining spiritual, technological, and practical elements. Hebrew Israelites must navigate this complex landscape while maintaining their identity, protecting their members, and fulfilling their prophetic calling as witnesses to divine truth in an age of unprecedented deception. As we conclude this extensive exploration of Hebrew Israelite identity and the emerging digital surveillance state, the urgency of our situation becomes absolutely clear. We stand at a prophetic crossroads where ancient biblical warnings meet modern technological realities in ways that demand immediate spiritual and practical response from every believer who takes Scripture seriously. The Hebrew Israelites have preserved essential wisdom about community survival, spiritual resistance, and prophetic discernment that proves invaluable for navigating the challenges ahead. Their example demonstrates that maintaining spiritual freedom and cultural identity remains possible even under conditions of systematic persecution and technological oppression. The infrastructure for the Mark of the Beast continues expanding daily through digital ID systems, biometric databases, and surveillance networks that promise convenience while delivering control. The time for comfortable neutrality and passive observation has definitively ended for all who seek to maintain their spiritual freedom and human dignity. I urge you to study these revelations carefully, examine the evidence presented, and prepare both spiritually and practically for the challenges that approach with increasing speed and intensity. The Hebrew Israelites offer a model of resistance rooted in ancient wisdom and prophetic understanding that provides hope and guidance for all who choose freedom over convenience, truth over deception, and spiritual loyalty over technological dependence. The choice before each of us grows more urgent with each passing day. Will you join the Hebrew Israelites in their ancient yet contemporary struggle for spiritual freedom? Or will you accept the comfortable slavery of digital surveillance and technological control? The decision you make will determine not only your temporal freedom, but your eternal destiny in the climactic events of human history that now unfold before our eyes. What will you discover about your own heritage as these hidden truths continue emerging? How will you prepare for the surveillance systems already surrounding you? The answers to these questions may determine whether you stand with the faithful remnant or fall victim to the greatest deception in human history.